You know what, guys? I got a really good 8-hour sleep last night, and as a result, I woke up in a pretty good mood this morning. So I decided I'm going to be a nicer person today. You guys know I'm typically always bashing delusional boomers, corporate shills, and capitalism in my videos, but I am a person with empathy. In other words, I try my best to put myself in someone else's shoes and understand their point of view too. So, for this video and this video alone, I'm not going to be bashing delusional boomers and corporate shills. In fact, I'm going to actually try to put myself in their shoes, understand their point of view, and become one myself. For just the next 15 minutes or so, I am no longer going to be the philosophical gamer. In fact, I'm going to be the capitalist gamer now. But here's the funny thing. Even if I use their own logic and adopt their own mindset, Gen Z is still absolutely right for being unemployed and refusing to work. How can this be, you might ask? Well, you're about to find out. Before we start, it's worth it to take a quick moment to clearly define capitalism. Those of you who follow me know I'm pretty biased when it comes to capitalism. I'm self-aware enough to acknowledge this. So I'll do my best to come up with a fair definition we can hopefully all agree on. To me, capitalism is all about profits. The end game of capitalism is profits and growth above all else. And I'm not going to debate whether this is a good or bad thing in this video. Again, keeping my own personal bias out of this. You can argue that profits are great because it creates more jobs and opportunities for everyone. You can argue it's horrible because it incentivizes people to prioritize money above morality and fellow human beings. I'll leave that up to you in this video. But hopefully we can all reasonably agree that for better or for worse, the ultimate endgame of capitalism is profits above all else. Capitalist companies themselves will even admit this when they say this affects our bottom line. The bottom line, of course, being profits. Okay, so we've established an unbiased definition of capitalism. Once again, I'm not saying it's a good or bad thing that capitalism is all about profits. You can make a case either way. I'm just establishing that profits are the ultimate endgame for any capitalist businessman, company, or corporation. There shouldn't be anything remotely controversial about that statement. Okay, cool. So now that we can all agree on a fair definition of capitalism, let's now get into the juicy truth bombs of this video. Buckle up, guys. You're about to see why Gen Z's decision of not wanting to work is totally justified, even from a pure capitalist standpoint. In fact, you could even call it the ultimate capitalist revenge. Part 1, living with parents, aka cutting costs. One thing I always found very ironic is how it's always the most conservative, capitalist, free market people who are the most fervently obsessed with hardcore shaming Gen Z for living with their parents. It's really weird because these people view literally everything as a business, as an Excel spreadsheet of profits and losses. But when it comes to your own personal life and finances, suddenly they lose all their financial literacy. As we already established, capitalism is all about profits, and profits are very easy to define. It is simply a math equation of revenue subtracted by cost. A lot of people are obsessed with the revenue portion of the equation because that's what looks and feels better. But the best capitalist businessmen are all equally, if not more, ruthless when it comes to cutting costs as well. So what does this all have to do with Gen Z increasingly deciding to live with their parents? Well, since we've all agreed to be capitalists just for this video, you have to look at your own personal life and finances as a business too. And in the context of profits above all else, Gen Z's decision to live with their parents is the absolute best cost-cutting measure available to them now, especially with how absurdly ridiculous rent prices are these days. Furthermore, it's not even as if renting is some sort of investment or necessary business expense where you pay up front, take a hit in the short term so that you can eventually profit more in the long term. You're not even paying to eventually own the apartment in the future, like with a mortgage. You're literally just bleeding money solely for the sake of bleeding money. Now, you tell me, in which universe would any capitalist businessman say that that's a good idea. If you told Rockefeller, Elon Musk, or Jeff Bezos, guys who went to the most extreme lengths to cut every penny possible, that your boomer parents want you to move out and pay $2,000 per month on a totally unnecessary business expense that only drains half your paycheck and doesn't contribute to helping profits in any way whatsoever, they would absolutely laugh in your face and tell you to get a reality check. And this is the biggest problem with delusional boomers and corporate shills. They want you to waste half your paycheck on a pointless and unnecessary expense every month. But they themselves would never do that. They shame you for living with your parents to save money, but they themselves would go to the absolute depths of hell to save every single penny imaginable. Gen Z is simply watching what they do instead of what they tell you to do. And it's pretty hilarious how those two things are almost never the same. Jeff Bezos was obsessively frugal in the early days of Amazon. Early Amazon employees remember even at the height of growth, he made employees bring their own desks made from cheap doors and refused to spend on office luxuries. One famous quote from an early executive claimed Jeff would walk the halls turning off lights to save on electricity. Elon Musk, in 2008, during the peak of the financial crisis, immediately cut 25% of Tesla's workforce nearly overnight. He didn't wait to restructure slowly. He acted like a spreadsheet. If you didn't directly generate revenue or progress, you were cut. Brutal, but rational to a capitalist. Rockefeller became the first billionaire in history partially by slashing costs to absurd levels. He forced railroads to give him rebates, essentially blackmail level discounts, paid workers far less than his competitors, and bought out rivals who couldn't compete with his ruthless efficiencies. These guys would literally starve millions of people if it meant they'd save a single penny. What do you think would happen if you told them half your paycheck was going towards rent, an expense you could avoid if you had the option to live with your parents? They would absolutely laugh in your face and tell you what a stupid idea that is. Hey guys, real quick, just wanted to say thank you all so much for this incredible, rapidly growing community we're building here. Wow, I swear it seems like it was just yesterday when we just barely hit 10K, and we're already almost up to 15K right now. So if you're new here and enjoying this content, definitely consider subscribing and helping us get closer to this key milestone. Part 2, debt. Let's imagine this scenario. You walk up to Elon Musk, John D. Rockefeller, or Jeff Bezos, and you present them this business proposal. Hey, let's give an 18-year-old who just finished high school a $50K student loan debt to force him to study something he doesn't even want to study himself in the hopes that he might be able to pay it off 20 years later. Oh, and by the way, it's only a 50% chance he even gets a job in the first place. Oh, and by the way, even if he does get a job, it likely won't be enough to pay back the loan anyways. Oh, and by the way, there's also a great chance that AI will have taken the job of whatever he was studying for before he even graduates. What do you think they would say? Well, this is a pretty hilarious no-brainer, obviously. Of course, they would just laugh hysterically in your face and tell you to GTFO of their office. And yet, this is what your delusional boomer parents and society want you to do the second you turn 18, especially in regards to college. Not only do they want you to do it, they force you to do it. They threaten to kick you out and cut off financial support if you don't do it. And the rest of society applauds them and claps along, shaming you as some sort of weirdo if you don't want to accept this legitimately insane business proposal. And yet, your boomer parents love to ass, kiss, and worship these CEOs all day. They even want you to be more successful like them. Well, you can now tell them that all of them would immediately tell you to GTFO out of their office if you came at them with the idea of going into massive amounts of debt just for a small chance that maybe one day you'll get a job from it. Part 3, businesses are on welfare too. I made a video a while back about how we all deserve universal basic income because there are hidden passive ways unemployed people contribute value just by existing. For example, if you're unemployed, you have a far less carbon footprint burden on the planet as you don't have to drive to work and your consumption habits will likely emit far less carbon emissions than somebody who works. Now, some people push back on this saying that this isn't really contributing value, it's just decreasing burden. But what they fail to realize is that once you're in debt, especially if you're in as deep of a hole as we all are in right now, there is literally no difference between the two. The difference between negative 1,000 and zero is exactly the same difference as the difference between 0 and positive 1,000. And if you don't believe me, consider that the majority of publicly traded businesses on the stock market, enterprises that are as capitalist as it gets, are not profitable. They can't turn a profit from their own business operations, and as a result, they have to depend on other forms of assistance, such as bank loans, investors, or government subsidies, which are funded by taxpayers, just like welfare is. This is why it's so funny to me when people say Gen Z is lazy or entitled for thinking they deserve free stuff. Businesses receive literally billions of times more, and none of them bat an eye. They don't necessarily have a problem with people receiving welfare. They only have a problem with poor people receiving welfare. Now, if you press them on this, a lot of them will say they're also against corporate welfare as well. But here's the thing. Over half of publicly traded businesses would go out of business pretty quickly if you eliminated corporate welfare. Our whole economy and society depends on welfare and people receiving free stuff. Over half of companies literally would not be able to function without it. But we only have a problem when poor people receive it. As this comment puts it perfectly, rich and not working, okay. Poor and not working, scandal. Part 4, who's really the burden? So, as we've already established, the difference between negative 1,000 and 0 is exactly the same difference between 0 and positive 1,000. Most companies are not even profitable themselves. So this means even for most capitalist companies, the goal isn't so much to profit more, the goal is to just reduce your debt or burden as much as possible. Again, not here to bash capitalism in this video, just here to apply the same capitalist logic businesses benefit from to our own lives as well. Fair is fair, same rules for everyone. So let's go back to Gen Z's decision to live with their parents and refuse to work, aka refuse to be exploited. This is just a capitalist cost-cutting measure to reduce debt and expenses as much as possible. All this delusional boomer logic of, but you have to work or you're a burden to society, but you have to work or you're a burden to others. Well, so are most publicly traded businesses, but the goal is to lessen the burden as much as possible, right? So Gen Z's decision to be unemployed is simply a smart economic decision that literally any capitalist business themselves would do. Capitalists always say that nothing is free, and that's why we have to work for everything. But if nothing is free, then getting a job isn't free either. In fact, it is one of the most expensive things on the planet right now. And you'll be way less of a burden if you're unemployed than if you work. Let's do the math. For most viable careers these days, ones that your boomer parents would consider a quote-unquote real job, you need a degree, which means you have to go into at least $30,000 of student loan debt. Also, once you graduate, you're going to have to move to a big city where rent is significantly more expensive. You're also going to need a car to get to work on time reliably, not to mention in America, pretty much every employer requires this to the extent that they won't even consider your job application if you don't have a car. Rent in a big city is probably going to run you at least $2,000 per month. A car is probably going to cost you at least $20,000 if you get a new and reliable one. You could always get an old, rundown used car, but those are very prone to breaking down, and eventually the maintenance and insurance costs are going to add up to the cost of a new car anyways. So now we're well over $70,000 in debt before we've even earned a single dollar. Keep in mind as well, none of these upfront debts you have to pay even guarantees you a job. We all know very well that in this economy, most people who get a degree can't get a job anyways. And even if you are one of the lucky few who gets a job, what are the chances you'll ever pay back all these debts? Student loan debt alone, on average, takes 20 years to pay back. And this is only going to get much, much worse with how bad inflation has gotten. We're probably now in a situation where most of us will never pay back the insane amounts of debt we have to go into just to get a job. Correction, the insane amounts of debt we have to go into just for the hope of getting a job. And to be even more specific, for a less than 50% chance that your degree will get you a job. Now, compared to if you're just an unemployed Gen Z living at home with your parents, you have zero debt, zero expenses. Maybe you cost your parents $300 per month in food or whatever, and this can be easily paid for if you just find a few online freelance gigs or even just by helping out around the house. So this is why this whole logic of, but you should work, otherwise you'll be a burden to society, is a totally stupid emotional argument. This entire statement only makes sense if jobs are free to get in the first place. But they're not. They're actually really expensive. And this means you'll be a far bigger burden to society if you do work than if you don't work. You'll be a $70,000 burden to society and your parents if you try to get a job. You'll be a $300 per month burden if you just live at home unemployed. Allow me to quickly clarify one thing. I'm not calling people who try to work and contribute a burden. I'm calling the system that forces them into debt a burden. The system will make you a far bigger burden if you do work than if you don't work. Now, once again, what would any capitalist businessman say about all this? If you went up to any of these billionaire CEOs, these delusional boomers and corporate shills love to ass, kiss, and worship all day, what would they say if you asked them this question? Hey, so I have two choices right now. Option one, I can either run a business where we operate at a small, manageable $300 per month loss, and it won't be that hard to find a few couple online freelance gigs to pay that back. Or option two, I can try a really insane and risky business idea where I first have to go $70K into debt for a less than 50% chance I'll even make a single dollar from it, and an even much smaller chance I'll ever pay that debt back and become profitable. Every single one of them would laugh in your face and ask, what kind of stupid question is that? Why even bother wasting my time with a proposal as ridiculous as option two? And this leads me to the ultimate point of the video. When it comes to delusional boomers and the capitalist shills they worship, watch what they do, not what they say. They want you to go into absurd amounts of debt that you'll never pay back. But they themselves would never, ever consider going into that level of debt for less than 50% chance they'll ever make a single dollar from it. They want you to waste money paying for rent, car payments, and all these unnecessary expenses. But they themselves wouldn't waste a single dollar when it comes to running their own businesses. So Gen Z living with parents and refusing to work in this system and this economy isn't being lazy or entitled. They're just doing what any capitalist businessman does when running their own businesses. They've rightfully seen that it's straight up just more profitable to be unemployed with how expensive it is to get a job now. They're cutting costs and reacting to free market incentives or the lack thereof. In many ways, them being unemployed is really just the perfect capitalist revenge. Now, the recent uprising of Gen Z NEETs started out as just a small niche community, but those days are over. It's rapidly exploded into a massive international movement influencing real change around the world right now. We cover this more in this video right here. Check it out. I'll see you there. Thanks for watching.